I had just returned from weeks away on the road, exhausted from long shifts in hotel beds that never felt like home. All I wanted was the warmth of my own house on Thanksgiving. The smell of roasted turkey, the sound of family voices, a fire in the hearth. But the picture that greeted me when I pulled into the driveway will never leave my mind. There, on the front porch, sat my granddaughter, Clara. 11 years old, wearing only a thin dress, her knees tucked to her chest. The night air bit hard, and the old thermometer nailed to the porch post read 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Her lips were pale, her tiny shoulders trembling, as if her bones might snap under the cold. For a moment I froze, unable to believe what I was seeing. Then, instinct took over. I threw off my coat, wrapped it around her, and lifted her into my arms. She clung to me with the kind of desperation no child should ever know, her fingers stiff and icy against my neck. "Grandpa?" she whispered, her voice fractured by chattering teeth. I'm not allowed inside." The words cut deeper than the cold. I pulled her closer and looked at the glowing windows of my house. Inside, I could hear faint laughter, the clinking of dishes, the hum of conversation, life carrying on as if nothing were wrong, as if Clara weren't outside fighting for warmth. I am Warren Blake, 65 years old. I've spent my life working with my hands, raising a family, trying to live with integrity. My late wife used to say I had a temper I never fully learned to control, but even she never saw me burn like I did in that moment. Because Clara isn't just my granddaughter. She's the last piece of innocence left in this broken household. I pushed open the door with my shoulder, carrying her in. The heat of the house brushed against us, but my focus was fixed on Clara. I lowered her onto the couch near the fireplace, rubbing her hands between mine, whispering to her that she was safe now. Behind me, footsteps approached. The shuffle of my son, the sharp click of his wife's heels. "What's going on?" she snapped, her tone already defensive. She was supposed to... I didn't let her finish. I wasn't ready to listen. My granddaughter's breaths were shallow, her eyes heavy, her face blotched red from the bitter wind. That was all that mattered. From the corner of the room, my wife, Clara's grandmother, sat in her chair, eyes clouded with the fog of dementia. Most days she drifts between memories and fragments of reality, but when she saw Clara wrapped in my coat, a flicker of clarity crossed her face. Her lips trembled, and she murmured, "She's so cold. Don't leave her outside." It was like hearing truth break through cracked glass. My heart twisted, knowing she understood enough to recognize the cruelty, but not enough to stop it. I leaned closer to Clara. "You're safe, sweetheart. I've got you." Then, for the first time since I stepped inside, I looked up. My son stood stiff, guilt written in the way he avoided my eyes. His wife crossed her arms, her expression hard, daring me to challenge her authority in my own house. The fire popped, filling the silence. Clara clung tighter to my sleeve, as if afraid I might set her down and let it all happen again. I felt something shift in me, a weight I hadn't carried since burying my wife years ago. The raw, immovable determination to protect what was mine. I rose to my feet, turned toward them, and the words left me before I could stop myself. "Who left her out here freezing?"
Who left her out here freezing? The words thundered out of me, heavier than my own voice had ever sounded. For a heartbeat, the room went still. My son's eyes flickered, a brief flash of shame buried under layers of cowardice. His wife, Clara's stepmother, stiffened like I'd accused her of treason. "She ruined everything," she said finally, her tone sharp as glass. "She broke the vase, Warren. That was your wife's vase, wasn't it? She has to learn." "Learn?" My voice cracked like a whip. "You call this teaching?" I pointed at Clara, her small frame swallowed by my coat, her hands still trembling. 5 degrees outside, and you thought that was a lesson? My son tried to step between us, as if shielding his wife. Dad, calm down. You don't understand. She's been disrespectful. She ignores her stepmother. Enough, I said, and my tone silenced him faster than a shout. Don't tell me about discipline when your daughter's lips are turning blue. From the corner, my wife stirred in her chair. Her voice was soft, wandering, but clear enough to sting. Children should be at the table, not in the cold. She drifted again, her gaze clouding as quickly as it had sharpened. But the words lingered, hanging over us like judgment. The stepmother's face flushed. She doesn't even know what she's saying. But I knew, and my son knew too. I sat back down by the fire, pulling Clara closer. She pressed her cheek against my chest, seeking warmth, safety, anything that didn't hurt. My anger simmered, but I forced it down. She needed comfort more than rage. For now. Clara, I whispered, brushing damp strands of hair from her forehead. Tell me the truth. How long were you out there? Her eyes flicked to her father, then to her stepmother. Fear gripped her face. She wanted to speak, but bit her lip instead, as if words might cost her more than silence. I leaned closer. Sweetheart, it's me, Grandpa. You don't have to be afraid. Her voice came out as a fragile thread. Since the morning, I felt my chest tighten. Hours in the freezing wind while her so-called family feasted inside. I looked at my son again. Is that true? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Behind me, there was a knock at the door. 2 quick raps, then silence. My son flinched. The stepmother paled. I knew who it was before I opened it. 2 of our neighbors stood outside, bundled in coats, their phones in hand. One of them, Mr. Riley, lifted his chin. We saw her. We filmed it. The stepmother hissed. You had no right. They had every right, I said, ushering the men in. More right than anyone sitting at this table pretending nothing happened. They set their phones down on the counter, screens glowing with frozen images of Clara curled on the porch, snow piling around her shoes. Another clip showed me pulling up, rushing to her, wrapping her in my coat. My hands shook as I watched it. Proof. Irrefutable proof. My son's voice cracked. Dad, you don't need to involve them. This is a family matter. No, I said, rising to my feet, every muscle in my body humming with conviction. Family matters are settled with love, with patience, with care. This is abuse, and I won't let it happen again. The stepmother slammed her palm against the table. You think you can just take her away? She's not yours to decide for. I turned to her, cold fury sharpening my words. She's my granddaughter, and after tonight, she'll never suffer under your roof again. Clara squeezed my hand. For the first time since I'd walked through that door, her eyes carried a spark. Not warmth, not safety yet, but hope. And that hope fueled me more than anger ever could. The stepmother sneered. You're overreacting. You can't prove anything. I nodded toward the glowing phones on the counter. Can't I? The phones on the counter glowed like silent witnesses, each frame a condemnation. My son stared at the screens, his jaw tight, his eyes darting from me to Clara as if searching for a way out. The stepmother crossed her arms, her face hard, but her eyes betrayed the flicker of fear that comes when lies can no longer stand. I pulled one of the phones closer, pressing play. The video showed Clara huddled on the porch, snowflakes clinging to her hair, her thin dress no match for the biting air. She rocked back and forth, trying to hold herself together, while inside, light spilled from the windows, warmth just beyond her reach. Then the second clip, my truck pulling into the driveway, me rushing toward her, wrapping her in my coat. The neighbors didn't need to say anything, the footage said everything. I felt my chest rise and fall with a storm I could barely contain. This isn't the first time, is it? My voice was steady, but underneath it my fury burned hotter than the fire in the hearth. Clara pressed closer to me. She hesitated, then whispered so faintly I almost missed it. No. The stepmother's head snapped toward her. Don't exaggerate, Clara. You make everything sound worse than it is. I held up a hand. Let her speak. Clara's small fingers tightened around mine. Last month, he made me sleep in the garage because I forgot to turn off the light. Her eyes glistened, but she pressed on. And before that, he locked me in the basement when I dropped one of his glasses. My heart broke with each word. I turned to my son, my voice shaking. You knew about this? He swallowed, his face pale. She needs discipline, Dad. You always said, kids. Discipline? The word spat out of me like poison. Discipline is teaching right from wrong, guiding a child with patience. This is cruelty. This is punishment for the sake of control. Don't you dare confuse the two. The stepmother shot back, her voice rising. She doesn't respect me. She ignores me, talks back, breaks things. What kind of home do we have if she's allowed to do as she pleases? I stepped closer, towering over her. A home where a child is safe, where mistakes don't mean frostbite, where love comes before fear. That's the kind of home she deserves. My wife stirred again in her chair. Her gaze, usually lost in a fog, sharpened for a fleeting moment. Don't hurt the girl, she whispered, before slipping back into silence. The words struck like a bell. Even through her illness, even through the haze, she knew what was happening. The stepmother's lips pressed into a thin line. You can't take her away. She's ours to raise. No, I said, pulling Clara into my side. She's mine to protect. And after tonight, I'll be filing for custody. I should have done it years ago. My son's shoulders sagged. Dad, don't. You'll tear this family apart. It's already torn, I answered. You let it happen. You chose to side with her instead of your own daughter. The neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, but neither left. Their presence was a shield, proof that I wasn't alone in this fight. I looked down at Clara, her wide eyes searching mine. For years, she had been taught to believe silence was survival. Now, with me beside her, she didn't have to be silent anymore. I took a deep breath, my resolve solidifying. Tomorrow morning, I said, my voice carrying the weight of an oath, I'll be standing in front of a judge, and I'll bring every shred of proof, these videos, her words, the history of what you've done. You won't be able to hide behind excuses any longer. Clara's stepmother sneered. You think the courts will believe you over us? I straightened, every ounce of doubt burning away. They won't have to believe me. They'll believe her. I placed a steady hand on Clara's shoulder, and they'll believe what they see with their own eyes. The fire cracked behind us, sending sparks up the chimney. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. But for the first time that night, I felt a shift. The control they'd held over this child was slipping, and the weight of justice was turning in her favor. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wouldn't stop until Clara was safe, no matter what it cost.
The dining room looked like a picture from a magazine. Candles lit, silverware polished, the turkey golden on a platter. It might have fooled a stranger into believing this was a happy family. But I knew better. That feast was built on silence and cruelty, and my granddaughter had nearly frozen to death while they sat in comfort. I carried Clara closer to the table, making sure she stayed wrapped in my coat. Her cheeks were still red from the cold, her little hands trembling as she held on to my sleeve. I pulled out a chair for her and guided her down, though she kept glancing at the door like she expected someone to drag her back outside. My son tried to reclaim his authority, his voice low but strained. "Dad, you're making this worse than it is. Clara disobeyed. She needed to learn." I leaned across the table, my hands pressed flat against the cloth. "She's 11 years old, and you left her out there to freeze." The stepmother's jaw tightened. "It was my decision. She broke your wife's vase, Warren, a valuable piece, and she laughed like it meant nothing." I turned to Clara. "Is that true?" She shook her head. "I didn't laugh. I cried. It was an accident." Her voice wavered, but carried enough force to crack the wall of lies. The stepmother slammed her hand against the table. "See? She twists everything. She plays the victim." "That's enough." My voice cut her short, the weight of a lifetime of restraint snapping in half. "You don't get to twist this, not anymore." For a moment, silence. Even my son wouldn't look at me. His wife tried to mask her rage with a thin smile, but her eyes burned with the desperation of someone losing control. From the corner, my wife stirred again. Her gaze wandered, then landed on Clara, and for the second time that night, clarity broke through. "She belongs at the table," she said softly. "With family." My throat tightened. A fragile truth, spoken from a broken mind, and yet sharper than any accusation. I straightened, my eyes on my son. "You heard her. Even your mother, sick as she is, can see it. What excuse do you have?" His lips parted, but nothing came out. He tried to glance at his wife, searching for courage, but found none. I took Clara's hand in mine, steady and firm. I said, "Listen to me." I raised my voice so neither of them could misunderstand my meaning. "If you think you can pass this off as discipline, you're wrong. This is abuse, and the world outside this house will see it for what it is." The stepmother laughed, short and sharp. "And what will you do? Run to the police? Tell a judge that we made a child sit outside for a little while? The laugh in your face." I leaned forward, meeting her eyes without flinching. "Try telling a judge this is discipline." The room went still. Even the fire seemed to quiet, waiting for what would come next. Clara's fingers tightened around mine, and in that small gesture, I felt her hope growing stronger.
The words hung in the air like smoke. "Try telling a judge this is discipline." I watched the color drain from my son's face. He shifted in his chair, but he didn't speak. For once, his wife had no quick answer either. Only the fire crackled, filling the silence they refused to break. Clara sat beside me, still wrapped in my coat. Her eyes darted between her father and me, caught in the weight of a moment that demanded truth. For years, she'd learned to keep her voice down, to swallow her pain, to believe silence was survival. But silence is heavy, and that night it cracked. "Dad," she whispered, so quietly I almost didn't catch it, then louder, trembling but clear, "You let this happen." The stepmother's head whipped toward her, shock flashing across her face. My son blinked as if slapped. He tried to laugh it off, but it came out broken. "Clara, sweetheart, you don't understand. We were just trying to—" "No!" Her voice sharpened, stronger than before. "You didn't stop her. You didn't protect me. You saw me out there shivering, and you did nothing." Her words cut through him like a blade. He sank back in his chair, hands tightening into fists against his knees. For the first time all evening, he couldn't hide behind excuses. The stepmother hissed, venom dripping from every syllable. "Ungrateful child, after everything we've done for you." I rose so quickly the chair legs scraped against the floor.
Everything you've done? My voice thundered. You call neglect and cruelty everything? You locked her outside on Thanksgiving Day. You starved her of warmth, of safety, of dignity, and now you dare to dress it up as care? The neighbors shifted uneasily by the doorway, their phones still in hand. They had recorded the evidence, but now they bore witness to something deeper, the truth no camera could fully capture. Clara's shoulders shook, but not from the cold anymore. Tears welled in her eyes, and she pressed them away with the back of her hand. I thought maybe you just didn't see, she told her father, voice breaking. I thought maybe you didn't know what she was doing to me, but you knew, and you let it happen. I placed a steady hand on her back. She didn't flinch. She leaned into it. That small trust was more powerful than any argument I could make. My son tried one last time, his voice soft, almost pleading. Clara, I was trying to keep peace in the house. You don't know how hard it is. No. Her reply was sharper than steel. Peace? There's no peace when I'm freezing on the porch. There's no peace when I'm locked in the garage or the basement. That's not peace. That's fear. The stepmother surged to her feet, fury twisting her face. She's lying. She's making all of this up to turn you against us. I stepped between them, my body blocking Clara from her glare. Enough. If you raise your voice at her one more time, you'll regret it. For the first time since I'd walked in, my son's eyes met mine, and what I saw there wasn't anger anymore. It was shame. He looked at Clara, then away, unable to hold her gaze. In that moment, I realized he knew she was right. He just didn't have the courage to admit it. Clara's small hand slipped into mine. Please, Grandpa, don't leave me here. I squeezed her hand, steady and sure. I won't. The stepmother barked a bitter laugh. You think you can just walk out with her? You think it's that simple? I turned, my decision already made. Watch me.
Watch me. The words left my mouth steady as stone. For a moment, no one moved. The fire hissed, the clock ticked, and Clara's hand clung tighter to mine. Then I pulled her gently to her feet. She stumbled, still unsteady from the hours in the cold, but I steadied her with an arm around her shoulders. The stepmother blocked our path, her voice rising in fury. You're not taking her anywhere, Warren. She belongs here. I met her glare without flinching. She belongs somewhere she is safe, and that is not under this roof. My son stood behind her, torn between the wife he chose and the child he abandoned. His lips parted as if to argue, but the words never came. His silence was louder than any protest. I guided Clara toward the door. She kept her eyes down, as though afraid one wrong look would drag her back into punishment. My wife, still seated in her chair, shifted slightly. Her gaze, cloudy most of the time, sharpened for an instant as we passed. Her lips trembled, and she whispered, "Don't let them hurt her again." My throat tightened. I paused long enough to brush her hand with mine. "I won't," I promised. She nodded faintly, then slipped back into her haze. The stepmother lunged forward, voice shrill. "If you walk out that door, don't come back. She'll have no home, no family." I turned, my voice cold as the air waiting outside. She never had a home here, not with you. The neighbors by the doorway exchanged glances, their phones still recording. Their presence was a shield, and I knew those recordings would matter when this night turned into testimony. Clara's stepmother hissed, "You'll regret this." "Not as much as you will," I said, and pushed open the door. The wind struck us instantly, sharp and biting, but this time Clara was wrapped in my coat and my arms. I lifted her bag from where I'd set it earlier and carried it to the truck. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from the weight of her body, but from the gravity of what I was doing. This wasn't just defiance, it was the line drawn in blood. Behind me, the doorway glowed with warm light. My son stood frozen there, his wife gripping his arm like a leash. He didn't stop me. That was all the answer I needed. I opened the truck door and helped Clara climb inside. The heater was still running, the air inside already warmer than the house we'd left. She curled against the seat,
clutching the coat tighter around her shoulders. I climbed behind the wheel, gripping it with hands that still trembled from rage. My headlights swept across the houses on the street, neat lawns covered in snow, chimneys puffing smoke. Families sat at tables behind those windows, safe, fed, together. And in the middle of it all, my granddaughter had been left to freeze like she didn't matter. I glanced at Clara. Her eyes were wide, uncertain, but no longer empty. She whispered, "You really won't leave me here again?" I looked straight ahead, my jaw set. Never. Her lips quivered, and for the first time that night, a small flicker of relief crossed her face. The front door slammed behind us, but I didn't turn to look. I shifted into drive, the tires crunching over snow as we pulled away from that poisoned house. As the lights of the street blurred past, I made myself a promise I couldn't break. Tomorrow, I would stand before a judge with Clara by my side and the truth in hand. They thought tonight was the end of the fight. They hadn't seen the beginning.
The courthouse smelled of old wood and paper, heavy, suffocating, the kind of place where truth is dragged into the light, whether you're ready or not. I hadn't stood before a judge in decades, not since a traffic citation back in my 20s. But this day felt different. This wasn't about me. This was about Clara. She sat beside me in the waiting area, her feet not quite touching the floor. She wore one of my late wife's sweaters, sleeves rolled too long for her arms, and held my hand tight enough to leave marks. She was trembling, but not from cold this time. Fear. Fear of seeing her father. Fear of not being believed. I bent close and whispered, "All you need to do is tell the truth. The truth will carry us." The door creaked open. "Case of Blake versus Blake," the clerk announced. We stepped inside. The room was plain but imposing. The American flag behind the bench, the judge peering down through rimmed glasses. My son sat across from us, shoulders stiff, avoiding Clara's eyes. Beside him, the stepmother radiated contempt, her lips curved in the same smug smile I'd seen the night before. She thought this was a performance. She was wrong. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Blake, you're requesting emergency custody of your granddaughter Clara Blake. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." My voice was steady, though my chest thundered. The judge glanced at Clara. "And this is Clara?" "Yes, sir." She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I presented the videos first. The neighbors had given me copies, time-stamped and clear as daylight. The screens lit up with images of Clara on the porch, shivering in the snow, my truck pulling into the drive. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of Clara's chattering teeth captured on the recording. The judge's brow furrowed. "Mr. Blake," he said to my son, "is this accurate?" "It's not what it looks like. We were teaching her responsibility. The judge, thank you, is inappropriate. We're not teaching anyone responsibility. Happy." The stepmother leaned forward, her voice sharp. "She exaggerates. She plays the victim." "Silence," the judge snapped, his tone cutting her down instantly. "I will not have theatrics in my courtroom." Then came Clara's turn. She clutched my hand, took a shaky breath, and spoke. Her words were halting at first, but soon poured out. The nights in the garage, the hours locked in the basement, the insults, the silence at the dinner table. Each word weighed heavier than the last. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye among the observers. Even the clerk wiped her face discreetly. My son kept his head low, shame hanging on him like a shroud. His wife sat rigid, fuming at the loss of control. The judge leaned back, his face grave. This is not discipline. This is abuse. And abuse has consequences. He signed a paper with a firm stroke. Effective immediately, custody of Clara Blake is granted to her grandfather, Warren Blake. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to Child Protective Services and the District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges. The stepmother gasped. "Criminal charges? You can't." "The judge, thank you, can, and I will." The gavel came down again. Clara's grip on my hand tightened. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, tears streaming, but there was relief there too. Relief and something more. Freedom. We rose to leave. As I guided her out of the courtroom, I caught my son's gaze for the briefest moment. His eyes were bloodshot, guilt swimming in them, but he said nothing. Words had abandoned him, as they always did when they mattered most. In the hallway, Clara exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. "Grandpa, we're really free?" I pulled her close. "Yes, sweetheart, we're free." But deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. If the judge followed through, the law would come knocking on their door next. And when it did, they'd finally learn what real consequences looked like. The weeks after the hearing felt like stepping out of a storm and into clear air. For the first time in years, Clara woke up without fear. No more locked doors, no more cruel punishments. Just mornings in a warm house, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, and the sound of my wife humming softly when her mind allowed it. Clara had moved into the guest room, the same room where my daughters once slept when they were her age. My late wife had kept quilts folded in the closet, bright colors stitched with patient hands. Clara wrapped herself in them every night, as if the fabric itself whispered that she was safe now. She began to smile again, at first only in flickers, small, cautious moments when she thought no one was watching. But soon laughter returned, light and unguarded, filling corners of the house that had been silent for too long. One evening, I found her in the living room, helping my wife arrange photographs on the mantel. My wife's illness left her drifting most days, but that night she seemed lucid, even calm. Clara showed her a picture of herself as a toddler, sitting in my lap, frosting smeared across her cheeks. My wife chuckled, patting Clara's hand. "You were always meant to shine," she whispered. For a moment, I swear, time rolled back and I could see the woman she used to be, and the girl Clara was always meant to become. The neighbors checked in often. Mr. Riley brought over wood for the fireplace. His wife dropped off casseroles that could have fed an army. They didn't just witness what happened. They became part of the shield around us, a reminder that community can stand where family sometimes fails. But the shadow of the past still lingered. Court documents arrived, confirming that Child Protective Services had opened an investigation. I knew there would be hearings, interviews, maybe even a trial. My son might face charges, and his wife certainly would. It was justice, though bitter. I had to carry both relief and grief. Relief for Clara's safety, grief that my own blood had betrayed her so deeply. One night, as I tucked Clara into bed, she asked the question that had been sitting heavy between us. "Grandpa, do you think Dad ever really loved me?" I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands folded. The truth was complicated, twisted by fear and weakness, but I wouldn't let her carry the weight of his failures. "Love without protection isn't love at all," I said quietly. "But I promise you this, I love you, and I always will." Her eyes filled, but she nodded, pressing closer into the quilts. "I know." Spring came sooner than I expected. The snow melted, crocuses pushed through the soil, and Clara started talking about school again, about friends she wanted to see, subjects she wanted to study. She even mentioned joining the music club. Each word was like sunlight breaking through clouds. And one Sunday morning, as we sat at the breakfast table, she smiled at me across her plate. "Grandpa, I think I finally believe it. We're safe now." I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. "Yes, Clara, we're safe." I looked around the table, at Clara, at my wife humming softly, at the photos on the mantel, and I realized something I hadn't dared to hope for. This house was a home again. Not perfect, not free from sorrow, but filled with something stronger. Truth, healing, love. I thought back to that freezing Thanksgiving night,
to the moment I carried Clara inside and shouted 6 words that changed everything. Who left her out here freezing? They had tried to bury her in silence, but the truth had risen, and because of that, we were here. This wasn't just survival. This was the beginning of a new life.